The noon sun hung heavy over the street, baking the dust until it seemed the earth might crack open and swallow the town whole. Heat shimmered off the warped planks of the saloon's porch, and the air smelled of horse sweat and stale whiskey. Men loitered in the shade, spitting into the dirt, hats pulled low. Somewhere, a piano tried to play, but its notes faltered under the weight of the day. The old man came in slow, his limp giving his stride a rhythm like a clock running down. A mule carried him, sway-backed and stubborn, its hooves sinking slightly into the dust with every step. He did not look at the men, nor at the women leaning against doorways with eyes that measured and judged. His gaze was fixed ahead, on the cluster gathered near the edge of the street, where a crude wooden platform stood like a gallows without a beam. The auctioneer's voice carried over the low murmur of the crowd, thick with dust and drink. $5, he barked, waving his hat toward the thin figure standing at the center of the platform. $5 for strong hands, for someone who will work sunup to sundown without a word. His pitch had the tired rhythm of a man who knew no one was buying. The girl's wrists were bound in front of her with rope that had frayed from too much use. She wore a dress the color of old bone, torn at the hem, dust clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair, long and tangled, hid most of her face, but what could be seen was a pale stillness, a refusal to look at the men who looked at her. She did not move, did not flinch when the auctioneer grabbed her arm and turned her toward the crowd. The old man reined in beside the platform. He did not speak right away, just studied her with the same squint he might give a stray animal, measuring whether it was worth the trouble to keep alive. $5, the auctioneer repeated, his voice dipping into mockery. $5 to own what's left of her. A man near the front chuckled. She'll eat more than she's worth. I'll take her, the old man said, voice quiet but carrying. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned. $5 then? The old man reached into his coat, the leather creaking, and brought out 5 silver coins. He dropped them into the auctioneer's palm, and their weight made the man's grin falter for just a moment. The coins were heavy, real, and in this part of the territory, that meant more than gold. The rope came off her wrists with a dry hiss. She didn't thank him. She didn't even glance at him. Her gaze stayed fixed somewhere past the horizon, as though she were already walking away in her mind. Yours now, the auctioneer said. The old man stepped down from the mule and held the reins out to her. You walk, he said. They left the town behind, the heat easing as they moved into the open prairie. The land stretched endless, brittle grass bowing under a faint wind that smelled of dry earth and something faintly metallic, like blood after rain. Neither of them spoke. The girl walked with long, steady strides, keeping pace with the mule without effort, her bare feet silent on the dirt. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, bleeding orange across the sky, shadows stretching long and thin over the rolling land. They passed the blackened remains of a homestead, charred timbers standing like broken teeth, a well still standing but dry. The old man didn't look at it. She did, just once, and then looked away. When darkness began to seep in from the edges of the horizon, he spoke for the first time since leaving town. You'll work for your keep. She said nothing. Cook, haul water, tend the animals. That's the bargain. Still nothing. Her silence wasn't the silence of someone afraid. It was deliberate, the kind that weighed more than words. They reached his homestead under a sky strewn with stars. The house was small, its walls weathered gray, the roof patched with mismatched boards. A barn leaned to one side, half its siding gone. The porch held a single rocking chair, swaying slightly in the night breeze. He tied the mule to the post and pushed the door open. The hinges groaned like an old man waking from a bad dream. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but the faint warmth lingered in the air. She stepped inside without hesitation, crossing the threshold as if it meant nothing. The floorboards creaked under her weight, the sound sharp in the stillness. Her eyes moved over the room, the rough-hewn table, the shelf with single tin cup, the rifle propped in the corner, cataloging each detail without showing a trace of reaction. The old man watched her for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he took off his coat, hung it on a nail by the door, and sat at the table. There's stew on the stove. Eat! She went to the pot without looking at him, ladled out a portion into a dented tin bowl, and sat on the floor to eat. The firelight caught her face then, just enough to reveal the sharp line of her cheekbone and the faint, fading bruise along her jaw. He didn't ask where it came from. She didn't offer. Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, the sound lonely and sharp against the vast dark. Inside, the only sound was the scrape of her spoon and the slow, steady tick of the clock on the wall. When she finished, she set the bowl down and looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were not grateful, not frightened. They were assessing, as if she were measuring the man the way one might measure a fence post before deciding if it was worth repairing. He met her gaze without blinking. Neither spoke. The fire popped, sending a thin coil of smoke curling toward the ceiling. The air between them felt like the space before a storm, quiet, heavy, waiting. Somewhere unseen, something in the prairie grass moved, its rustle lost to the night wind. Morning came slow, with a pale fog clinging to the brittle grass outside. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, though no rain had fallen in weeks. A single rooster crowed, the sound hoarse and tired, as if even had grown weary of announcing the day. She was already awake when the old man rose, standing barefoot in the yard with her back to the house, staring toward the horizon. The hem of her dress brushed against her ankles in the wind, and her hair lifted like a dark banner. She turned only when he spoke. "Water's in the well. Woodpile's low." She didn't answer, but the sound of the door closing behind him was enough to say she'd heard. By the time he returned from the barn, she was lowering the bucket into the well, arms steady, her movements efficient and without wasted effort. The first days settled into a rhythm. Silent chores, the scrape of a hoe in the garden, the clink of tin cups against the table. She spoke little, but her eyes missed nothing. When she passed through the rooms, it was as though she were mapping them, storing details in some quiet place. At night, when the lamplight burned low, he would catch her glancing toward the small bedroom where he slept. She never lingered, never crossed a threshold, but there was a curiosity in her that she didn't bother to hide. He knew she had noticed a locked trunk under his bed. The nights were not kind to him. Sleep came in shallow waves, broken by dreams that left his throat raw and his body damp with sweat. Some nights he woke to find her standing in the doorway, silent, her expression unreadable. She would leave without a word, her bare feet making no sound on the boards. The land itself seemed restless that week. Hawks circled lower than usual, their shadows sweeping across the yard. Once in broad daylight, a hawk carried off one of the hens, its wings beating hard against the sky. The wind came in strange bursts, carrying the smell of smoke from somewhere unseen, a faint whisper of fire that never arrived. Even the water from the well tasted different, metallic, like it had been sitting in old blood. One afternoon, he told her to split wood for the stove. She nodded once, but when he came back from checking the fence, she was down by the creek instead, squatting at the water's edge, her hands buried in the current. The axe lay untouched against the stump. "You hear me tell you what needed doing?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I heard. You got some reason for not doing it?" Her fingers stirred the water, and when she finally turned her face to him, her eyes were steady and cold. "I'll work, but I won't be told like a dog." For a moment, his hand twitched toward his belt. The thought of striking her rose sharp and sudden, the way a man's temper does when old habits haven't yet died. But he stopped. There was something in her gaze, not fear, not defiance exactly, but the quiet certainty of someone who'd already decided what she would endure and what she would not. That night, he dreamed of gunfire again, of dry grass burning, of a child's voice calling a name he no longer dared speak aloud. When he woke, the room was dark, but he could hear her moving outside, the faint crunch of her steps in the yard. 2 days later, he rode into town for supplies. The air there felt different, tense, tight around the edges. Men stood in small knots, speaking in low voices. The shopkeeper gave him a long look before filling his order. "Rider's been seen," the man said, weighing a bag of flour in his hands. "Look in for someone. Some say a runaway. Some say a bounty." "What kind of bounty?" the old man asked. The shopkeeper shrugged, but his eyes flicked toward the street. The kind where the law don't ask questions. They had the look of men who collect things, money, property, debts. Folks been keeping their doors shut at night. The old man didn't reply. He finished his business, loaded the supplies onto mule, and rode out without lingering. The ride home felt longer than it should have, the prairie stretching wide and watchful around him. That evening, the wind carried the faint sound of horses from somewhere beyond the ridge. The girl paused in her work, her head tilting slightly, as if measuring the distance by ear. She said nothing, and neither did he. When darkness came, she waited until the lamp was out before slipping into the barn. She moved in silence, her step certain, as if she'd been here long enough to know where each creaking board lay. In the far corner, she knelt and began to dig, the dry earth coming up in small, careful scoops. It wasn't long before her hand struck something solid. She brushed away the dirt to reveal a small metal box, rusted along the edges. The latch gave with a faint snap. Inside, wrapped in a strip of oilcloth, was a child's shoe, small, scuffed, the leather stained a deep, dark brown that had once been red. Beneath it lay a folded sheet of paper. She unrolled it slowly. Even in the dim light, she could make out the print. A wanted notice. The ink blurred at the edges from age. The name beneath the bold letters meant nothing to her, but the sketch, a younger version of the old man, eyes sharper, mouth harder, was unmistakable. Her breathing slowed. She studied it for a long time before placing both items back in the box. She buried it again exactly as she'd found it, smoothed the dirt with the flat of her hand, and left without a sound. In the house, the old man lay awake, eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. He heard the faintest squeak of the barn door closing, and though he didn't move, he knew she had found something. Neither of them spoke of it. Not yet. The first hint of trouble came with the dawn, red light spilling over the horizon like a wound that refused to close. The prairie lay quiet. But the stillness had weight, the kind that presses into a man's bones before he knows why. Far off, the coyotes that usually called at sunrise were silent. The old man stepped onto the porch, boots scraping against the warped boards, and scanned the ridges to the west. Hoofbeats carried faint on the wind, so soft they might have been mistaken for the rolling hum of the earth itself. But he knew the sound too well. Riders. Too many to be a neighbor, too few to be a posse. By the time the neighbor boy appeared, small, wiry, his face pale under the brim of his hat, the hoofbeats had grown clearer. "They're coming," the boy gasped. "Don't know if it's for her or for you. Maybe both. My pa says I shouldn't be here." The old man didn't waste words. "Go on home. Lock your doors." The boy nodded once and was gone, his pony kicking up dust as it vanished into the prairie grass. Inside, the girl stood by the table, knife in her hand, sharpening the blade with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound was steady, a soft rasp that seemed to echo in the room. She didn't look up when he came in. "How many?" she asked. "Don't know yet. Enough to matter." She slid the knife into the sheath on her hip, her fingers lingering on the hilt for just a heartbeat. "What are you going to do?" He opened the cabinet where the rifle rested, its stock worn smooth from years of use. He laid out cartridges on the table, lining them in a neat row. "What I have to." Rain began to fall without warning, tapping against the tin roof. At first it was a scattered patter, but soon it thickened into a steady drumming. The smell of wet dust rose from the yard, heavy and familiar, the scent of storms that change everything. In the flickering light from the stove, they sat across from each other for the first time since she'd come to his house without a wall of silence between them. "I used to think I was fighting for something worth the blood," he said, voice low. "Turns out I was just talking what never belonged to me. I lost my boy because of that. Lost my wife, too." Her eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. "I was 12 when they took me," she said. "Sold me to men who thought names weren't worth remembering. I decided then I'd never belong to anyone. Not ever again." They let the words hang between them, heavier than the rain. Outside, the hoofbeats grew closer, the sound now mixed with the creak of saddle leather and the occasional jingle of spurs. When the first flicker of torchlight appeared on the ridge, the girl moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see. Shapes emerged, men on horseback, their outlines blurred by the rain. their faces hidden beneath wide brims. The torches flared and hissed in the wet air. One rider called out, his voice sharp and carrying, "We got papers say she's property. You hand her over. We leave you in peace." The old man stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the rain running off the brim of his hat. "Ain't nothing in this world belongs to you," he said. A low chuckle came from the shadows. Another voice, rougher, "You're standing in the way of a lawful claim." "Lawful don't mean right," the old man said. From inside, she watched him through the doorway, the firelight at her back, her hand resting on the knife hilt. The rain plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't move to wipe it away. One of the riders fired into the air, the crack splitting the night. The horses stamped and tossed their heads. The old man didn't flinch. She stepped outside then, moving until she stood just behind him. The torchlight caught the edge of her blade, a thin flash of silver in the dark. The leader's gaze shifted to her. "You come now, girl, and we'll leave the old man breathing." Her voice was calm, almost quiet. "No." A moment passed where no one moved. The rain falling harder, the torches flickering like they might go out. The old man's finger tightened on the trigger. The leader spat into the mud. "Then we'll take you both." The night seemed to close in around them. The rain turned the ground to black mud, the air thick with the smell of horses and gunpowder yet to be spent. Somewhere in the dark, a horse snorted, and the sound felt like the last breath before the fight began. The rain slicked the porch boards under the old man's boots, the wood dark with water and years of wear. His breath came slow, steady, though his pulse was a drum in his ears. Across the yard, the riders fanned out, their shapes blurred by the downpour, torches spitting in the wet air. Somewhere in the dark, a horse pawed at the mud, impatient for the violence to come. The first shot broke the standoff. A bullet splintered the porch rail inches from his hand, sending a shard of wood spinning into the rain. He swung the rifle to his shoulder and fired back, the kick jarring his bad leg. One of the torchbearers dropped with a cry, his light tumbling into the mud and dying with a hiss. The girl moved as if the chaos were air she'd breathed before. She darted from the porch, low and quick, disappearing into the shadow of the barn. Another shot rang out, close enough that she felt the heat of it graze her arm. She didn't flinch. The riders pressed forward, firing as they came. The old man worked the rifle's lever smooth and fast, each shot deliberate, measured. One horse went down hard, pitching its rider into the muck. The smell of wet earth mixed with the sharp tang of gunpowder, the night breathing like a living thing. Inside the barn, the girl pressed her back to the wall, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. She could hear the shuffle of boots just outside, the scrape of a man's breath. When the door creaked open, she was already moving, knife flashing once, then twice. The man staggered, clutching at the rain-darkened wound on his chest, and collapsed into the straw. She stepped over him without a word. Back in the yard, the old man's rifle clicked empty. He tossed it aside and drew the revolver from his hip, the weight familiar, almost comforting. Lightning flared overhead, turning the riders into pale silhouettes. He counted them. Too many left standing. A shout cut through the storm. The girl burst from the barn astride one of their horses, kicking hard, the animal's hooves tearing furrows in the mud. She drove straight into the line of riders, scattering them, forcing their formation apart. In the confusion, the old man put a bullet to the hand of the man, who seemed to lead them, the pistol spinning into the mud. The leader screamed, clutching the mangled root of his fingers, and fell to his knees. The others hesitated, the fight in them faltering without his command. By the time the girl reined in beside the porch, only one rider remained upright, his gun dropped, his eyes wide with a sudden understanding of survival's worth. The rain ran down his face, washing the grime into pale streaks. He looked from the old man to the girl, and back again. The old man raised his revolver, but didn't fire. He looked at her instead, his question unspoken. Her knife was still in her hand, the edge bright even in the dim torchlight. For a moment she said nothing, only studied the man on his knees like she was reading a page written long ago. "Go," she said finally, her voice low but carrying. "Tell them I'm no one's property." Not now. Not ever. The rider didn't wait to be told twice. He mounted a half-wild horse and vanished into the rain, swallowed by the dark beyond the ridge. When it was over, the silence was as loud as the gunfire had been. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the air thick with the smell of churned mud and blood. The old man leaned against the porch post, breathing hard, his leg threatening to give beneath him. She stood a few feet away, the knife now loose in her grip, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. They buried the bodies at dawn. The work was heavy, the ground soft from the rain, but neither complained. The sky was pale gold by the time they finished, the sun breaking through a seam in the clouds. Back inside, the old man took the folded wanted poster from the locked trunk and fed it into the stove. The edges curled black, then fell into ash. He didn't speak while it burned, and she didn't ask. On the porch, she stood with her hair damp and loose around her face, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he joined her, she glanced his way but said nothing. They didn't need words for what passed between them. The wind carried it well enough. Out beyond the ridges, the land stretched endless and unbroken, the sun cutting a bright path over the wet grass. They watched it together, neither looking away, as if the horizon itself might offer them something more than the past had taken.